Oh, well, hello, George.
G'day, mate. How are we? How are we
Good,
feeling?
man. Oh, so. You can probably still hear it in the voice. It's very much a so. But as of this morning, no COVID yet. So I don't know. I mean, you've had a touch of the dirty C word, eh? Did you pretty much as soon as you felt crooked, you tested positive, or how did it work for you?
Yeah, 24 hours. Yeah. Oh, nah. Yeah, it was. Yeah, I got like a faint sort of line. I think it was less than 24 hours. You'll be all right, Pat. I reckon.
I think I'll be all right either way, if you look at the odds. But yeah, I guess by tomorrow morning we'll know for sure. But yeah, no, feeling a little bit ratchet.
Yeah. Either way, you'll feel like shit today.
Yeah.
Tomorrow, maybe.
Yeah. But no, doing all right, bro. Yeah, I was gonna say when I said hello, George, I just for the first time thought, did you have a nickname at school?
Nah. I mean, at my school, all the boys called each other by their last names. So it's Elliot.
Which is a bit confusing because that's also a boy's first name.
Yeah. Georgie Boy was what my friends call me, which is not really a shortened nickname. It's sort of a fuck around nickname. First name's Ernest.
Nickname. Your first name's Ernest.
Middle name. That's what it's called. Middle name.
Yeah, no, I used to get my dad's name is Bede, like St. Bede's College in Christchurch, Bede, because I think that's where my grandfather went. And he was also president of the Rugby Referees Association and a rugby referee for a very long time. And I went to Sacred Heart College. He went to Sacred Heart College as well. But I started going to secondary school at St. Peter's College in central Auckland. So I moved from St. Peter's College to Sacred Heart College. So I sort of have a loyalty to both of them, although my senior years are at Sacred Heart. And so anytime like St. Peter's First 15 were playing Sacred Heart First 15, he would try and get involved, and he used to run the touchline, and his name was Bede. And so my friends used to laugh at him and call him Beedy on the line, Beedy on the touchline running with the flag. And so then for maybe a year or so, my nickname was Beedy on the line for some reason, because that was him, named after my father in more ways than one. So there you go, nicknames, eh? If you're watching, what are your nicknames? Put them in the chat. Welcome to do that. Jay gives us some information around testing for COVID. Took 2 days of full sickness before showing up for my mate. Oh, this is like, I got a friend who, but apparently PCR shows up if you've got the smallest amount. Yeah, look, honestly, I had at no stage thought I had it or think I have it, but it's just pretty ironic. We talked a bit about this last night, didn't we? That the first time we kind of go out of our cautious zone and take a few risks, calculated risks here and there, I pick up some kind of airborne illness first time. Now, is that because pure coincidence? Is that because I haven't really been sick for 2 years and so my immunity is down? Because you know how when you catch something, you kind of build an immunity to it. So therefore, if you haven't had a cold or a flu or anything for 2 or 3 years, are you more susceptible to picking up one more easily that maybe other immunes may fight off? I don't know. But it's just kind of ironic that we've been having these conversations the whole time about how, masks and stuff are an interesting thing and airborne things are still out there. And the first time we really do it and go out and spend time in cafes, albeit still taking some precautions, I find myself in intimate connection with an airborne virus, which appears to be a cold, not COVID, but we'll find out tomorrow. I'm just looking for another day off work, George. That's all it is. So that's why I'm fingers crossed. Anyway, so that's us. Other than that, what are we going to talk about tonight? Well, we've got a few things to talk about tonight, and you'll excuse me because you can hear it through the night. There might be a bit of throats clearing and coughing as we're going through, but we'll muddle on. The government, now I don't know if it's a policy or legislation or like a working document, but have finally released and decided what's going to happen with climate change and emissions charges when it comes to farmers. We're going to have a look at that. There are probably some goods and some bads. Some of the goods might be this seems to be a world's first for getting farmers to pay for their emissions. Some of the bad seems to be for some fucking reason they've got a 95% discount compared to other businesses. We're also going to have a look at ACT tonight, and the ACT party has come out saying, ironically, they want to make sure we're all equal under the law when it comes to race, which is their typical MO. They want to have a referendum on co-governance, and they want to have a referendum on the treaty. They don't want to have any referendums on anywhere else where a protected class gets a privilege, but they definitely want to have it when it's based on race. And there was a really interesting item released today. I think News Hub was exclusively covering it today. It is the Oxfam Aotearoa International Inequality Index. And News Hub has done something really interesting with it. I'll show you the headline, actually. We won't do the story just yet. You can see from the headline, ranked 136th in the world on fair wealth distribution, leading to a call for new tax. Now, you'll be surprised to know that that's not the full story. The full story is New Zealand actually comes out of the index looking pretty darn good overall, with some areas to improve in. So we'll have a bit more of a look at that as we get towards the end of this episode. Now, whether this episode goes for 20 minutes, half an hour, or 40 minutes, we'll see how it pans out, but that's where we're going to go tonight. All good, George? Anything else you want to throw in there?
Nope.
Well, let's start with the Prime Minister, shall we? Prime Minister Jacinda Ardern was out at a farm today. You can tell she was at a farm because she's dressed to be at a farm. And that's Kieran McNulty, isn't it, in the background, I think? And I think there's actually a rule that says if the Prime Minister goes to a farm, McNulty has to be with her. I think that's the rule for some reason. And she was talking about this new idea, this new legislation, this new initiative around what farmers and those in the agriculture sector are going to be doing when it comes to paying for their emissions. We'll hear a bit from the Prime Minister. We'll play a bit of a story from News Hub. We'll get your views on it if you want to join in the chat, and then George and I will have a chat about it as well. But let's hear from the Prime Minister first.
Nearly 3 years ago, the government and farming leaders announced a partnership that was the first of its kind in the world. He waka ika noa, our future in our hands. A proposal that committed government and the agricultural sector to work together to develop a plan that reduces emissions and prices methane and nitrous oxide at farm level by 2025. Today, that partnership has resulted in a pragmatic set of proposals that will reduce agricultural emissions, meet our 2030 methane target, and in doing so, enhance our export brand. We agree with He Waka Ika Noa and the Climate Change Commission that farm level pricing presents the best opportunity to meet our emissions targets. The government has largely included the He Waka Ika Noa partnership proposal to price and reduce emissions, which the government has built on in the consultation document released today. The proposal as it stands means New Zealand's farmers are set to be the first in the world to reduce agricultural emissions, positioning our biggest export market for the competitive advantage that brings in a world increasingly discerning about the provenance of their food.
I think it's a really interesting point. So when it comes to export all over the world, countries, importers are wanting to know, let's say the like food miles, the traveling miles, the carbon that comes with these food things they're importing. So as much as anything, this seems to be a smart business move for selling your items. I mean, I remember when it all kind of started off maybe 10, 15 years ago, and you'd see driving around central Auckland, carbon neutral courier drivers. It was a marketing scheme to make that courier company seem more attractive. Now, I'm not saying that this is the reason that this government's doing it, just to seem more attractive, but that's certainly a byproduct of this. That if some importer somewhere in the world is looking at two products and one of them is coming from, let's say, a more ethical, let's say a cleaner area, and one of them is not, chances are and it's a similar price, I guess, because price always dictates, doesn't it? Then they'll lean towards the one that's coming from the cleaner, greener area. And
but it's more that Yeah, it's more than that impression, because in some markets you're going to have regulations in the EU, possibly. I'm speculating, where that is a stipulation in terms of trade agreements and that kind of thing, that the more emissions friendly or whatever is the one that's prioritized in terms of trade.
Yeah, so I was going to look to have someone on tonight to talk about this, maybe someone from the farming community, but I thought about this and I was like, my first question would be, and it's a silly question, I guess, to ask, but it would be, do you accept the idea that climate change is an issue and we have to do something about it? And the reason I didn't spend a lot of time trying to organize that was I get the feeling, and I could be wrong, but I get the feeling that some would say no. And if someone says no to that question, then the rest of the conversation is pointless. Because if someone doesn't think it's an issue, then they don't think you need to do anything about it, which is one of the problems in the idea that if it is an issue, then something needs to be done. So one of the things I'd love to talk to someone about one day, and I'm sure we will, is if this, because there is some noises today from the farming sector who aren't happy about this, but it's like, well, so what is the solution? What are you going to do? What are we going to do if it's not this? It's a little bit like we were talking about last night, and sorry to talk about the Dunedin item, but we have 2 one-ways in Dunedin, and there is an idea with our mayoralty campaigns to change the one-ways or not. Now, what the people going for the mayors weren't talking about is not to change the one-ways is actually off the table. The one-ways have to change some level because we're having a new hospital built. So the status quo is not viable. Status quo is not an option, even though a lot of the people vying for mayor were saying we're not going to move, we're not going to change the one-ways. So in this same sort of instance, I think the status quo in the agriculture sector, when it comes to carbon emissions and climate change, the status quo is not on the table. So something has to change. The government's basically said to the farming sector, you guys tell us what you want to do, and if you don't, we'll put you into the general group, but if you do, we'll work with you. And this is the announcement that's been made today.
Yeah, yeah. It's quite a complex. I mean, the emissions trading scheme is already far above my head, but this is sort of, I guess, in the general outline, going further to agree with some farmers. For example, the what's the company, Beef and Lamb New Zealand, to work together on this, and also add in some stuff to the emissions trading scheme, which again is like, yeah, I don't trade in emissions myself, so it's a little bit above my head.
Yeah. All right. Well, let's hear some more from the Prime Minister.
I know once finalised, this will put New Zealand on the best possible footing going forward. The proposal would give New Zealand farmers control over their future, control over the way they make their reductions, the costs, and their farming systems. Importantly, all money raised from charges on emissions will be recycled back into the system to fund further research, tools, and technology, as well as farmer incentives in order to help reduce emissions. All revenue will go back into those goals. I know Minister O'Connor will speak to the specifics of this a bit more shortly. But for now, let me say this. Here we have a proposal to make our farmers not only the best in the world, but the best for the world. That has the potential to unlock an emerging and significant price premium for climate-friendly agricultural products and boost our export brand. It's a system the sector has come up with, which is largely being backed by the Climate Commission and the government. Let's all be open. This has not been done anywhere yet. And as with any first, it won't be perfect. And we're open that this proposal is not. But the objective to drive as much consensus as possible is important in getting a system set up that lasts the distance, and that importantly, over time, we can refine together to make sure it achieves our shared goals. I've been on 5 trade missions so far this year, and each and every one has had the issue of climate and food production and food security raised with me. Our recently incredibly high-value New Zealand-UK FTA locked in the most significant climate chapter in our trading history. And there is emerging evidence that the global marketplace pays premiums for carbon-neutral products that it can increase profitability of some farms.
Which, again, is what we're talking about. there's a premium on this in the world market, so this is going to be good for sales. I also know, sorry, I shot off to get a drink whilst it was playing. I didn't get a chance to mention it. I think it's important to reiterate what the Prime Minister has said. And interestingly enough, when we play the bit from News Hub that reports on this scheme, none of this footage gets used. So I don't know quite how they have the Prime Minister talking about this release today, and in the News Hub item of 3 or 4 minutes, none of this footage gets used, which I don't know what that says, but I find it to be bizarre that the person announcing these schemes and announcing the new initiative is not quoted at all in that story, but we'll get to that. It was quite important just to note and to let people know, because you know what National's going to say. They're going to go, oh, tax grab. So the Prime Minister has made it very, 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 very clear about 90 seconds ago that 100% of the money that's taken in on this new scheme, however it comes in, will go back into the agricultural sector. So this is the money that's taken in this initiative will go back into this initiative, and that's the only place it will go. I just think it's a really important thing to highlight.
The National spokesperson for agriculture conceded that they liked that idea, right? And I guess that's the hope in terms of this being a proposal for now, is that it does live to the 2025 goals, as they say, lives through the election of Luxon or whoever, and goes the distance.
Yep. And look, there are people in the chat who are talking about that sort of thing as well, putting all the money straight back in, everything that goes back into research, how much they may be okay. So yeah, I think that's important. It's a really important point to remember. And I'm not saying it's ammunition to use when people are going to challenge this for you watching or listening, but I like for us just to be informed. And I think that's a really important part of this initiative to know, is that this is not a tax grab that's going other places to fund other things by quote unquote Labour or the woke left or whatever. This is money that's being taken in by people who are polluting, businesses that are polluting, to go back into the issue of polluting. I'm paraphrasing, but polluting emissions trading scheme. How you want to do it?
50% of our emissions, dairy industry,
So let's we'll play a bit more. There's about another 60 seconds to go, I think.
I saw for myself the incredible interest in Silver Fern Farm's net carbon zero beef after we promoted it in the United States. There is such huge opportunity for New Zealand in the world right now if we get this right. And today shows that we are on the right track. And so I will support our primary sector to make this change, just as they have made changes to prepare for the future before. And I will continue to be their biggest advocate in the global marketplace, because I genuinely believe that New Zealand farmers are the best for the world. Today I can conclude on this, another landmark day in New Zealand's transition to a low emissions future, on the delivery of a promise to price agricultural emissions from 2025, to say thank you. We now have to work through much more together via a consultation process to make sure that we get all the elements of the scheme right, and how to make clear to each and every farm, including on sequestration and the levy setting process. In particular, I want to make clear that with dry stock, deer, sheep and beef farmers are more greatly affected by this proposal, that the government remains open to providing support, including transitional support. Let's talk about how we can make this system work. There are issues for us to work through to make that happen. But for now, let's look to how far we have come. Let's look to the certainty that has been found through a process of partnership for the benefit of every New Zealander now and for the generations to come, who will thank you for this action.
There you go. That's the full scrum. Then she goes on to talking to the guys from behind. Oh, was it actually a hay bale? Was it? I didn't notice that. That is pretty cool. Oh, yeah, it is so. There you go. I do. If you're watching and not listening, if you're watching, you would have seen all the camera angles. That's what TV cameramen do, so they can get like a nice shot for the news that night. So I'm hoping this is a TVNZ cameraman, because as I said, none of this gets used on the News Hub item that we're going to watch shortly as well. But before we do that, George, what are your thoughts? Any thoughts around? I mean, I'm sorry, I asked you a question. I'm about to answer my own question. It's like, I think that the conversation with anybody for me is, if they accept that there is this climate change issue, and I think everyone watching will, and most sensible people do, then the question is, what are we going to do? if they don't accept it, and there are some out there, living in Dunedin, I've spoken to several people who work in the farming industry around this neighborhood, and they think it's all a big bunkum and a big waste of time, big waste of money. You're never going to be able to have a conversation with them because they think there's no problem to solve. But yeah, I think the question is, if not this, then what? George, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, because the criticism is often that the emissions trading scheme is like these are all sort of market-based ideas to tackle climate change, right? That they don't actually use the regulatory force of a central government. They rely on the market to fix itself. This is sort of the constant thing that we've seen for too long, is that we think that the market will regulate itself, that the invisible hand will sort it out, and that it will, somehow a profit-driven incentive will fix climate change. When I personally don't have the faith in that.
Yeah. It is particularly interesting as well when you talk about the results, and if it's a market-driven result sort of thing, is that, and we'll hear more about it in the news hub item we're about to play. But again, to reiterate, the agriculture sector has been asked, how are you going to solve this issue? And for the area that is causing the most trouble in this, for the group that's causing the most trouble in this area, I just wonder how many other places a government would say to the biggest offenders, well, you tell us how you're going to figure it out. Come on, tell us how you're going to figure it out. And when they do tell you, the government then goes, okay, and we'll help. Because you'll hear in this, if you didn't hear it clearly from the Prime Minister, the story we're about to play, is that they have a 95% reduction. So even though the farming sector, the agricultural sector is having to pay, they're paying 5% of what they're costing. So, I mean, you'll see in this as well, it's about to come up, I'll play in a second. I'll stop talking about playing and just play it. Is that groups like Federated Farm, it's like the Federated Farmer guy in this upcoming clip is like a 16-year-old boy who's about to be told off. He kind of walks into the press conference, goes, yeah, I guess we have to get on board. Because the reality is you're being offered a fucking 95% discount.
Yeah.
If you don't get on board now and you just join the ETS, it's all on you, buddy, and it's all on your farmers. So I feel like so often, in fact, what is it? Groundswell. The groups like Groundswell that are going around the farming communities and getting all the farmers on board because they don't want to pay for someone else's pipes, that sort of thing, are now going to be the benefits of us paying for their emissions trading scheme. So there's all these hypocrisies and stuff that go on as well. And the start of this news hub story, I'm looking at the item now, I'll just bring it up. I'll read you the first couple of lines. It says, farmers will have to pay agricultural emissions under a scheme proposed by the government in response to advice from the sector and the Climate Change Commission. It's proposed that the farmers start paying levies on emissions from 2025. The price will be set by cabinet based on advice from the Climate Change Commission and some input from the sector. So that's the start of the item. We might, unless there's anything else from you right now, George, we could just play this and get some more of it.
No, that's yeah, all good.
All right, so we'll get, this is now more of a synopsis of the overall story, and as I said, they get a 95% reduction in price. So yeah, I guess they're kind of having to go, yeah, I guess we'll come on board. 5% is better than, if we have to, we will. So here's the news hub spin on it.
A watershed moment. That's what the country's biggest polluters are calling their proposal for paying for their own emissions.
Yeah, a little stab there. What the country's biggest polluters. Oh, I quite like that. It's a nice little stab.
Agriculture makes up half of New Zealand's emissions, but it isn't in the emissions trading scheme. So the government told the primary sector to come up with its own pricing plan or be forced into the ETS by 2025. So individual farmers will now be responsible for calculating and paying for their greenhouse gases. They'll pay less for methane and get discounts for taking action to cut emissions. It's expected the proposal will reduce methane emissions by 4.5% to 5% by 2030. It
would be good, George, because I can't Google anything because I'm playing this. Why don't you Google while we're playing this? What, like, can we find any information as to what that reduction will, is that a worthwhile reduction? Like, are we being told, excuse me, that we need to reduce methane by 40%. Like, what are we being told is our target worldwide? Because if it's 50%, if we need to reduce methane by 50%, I guess one could then again ask, well, what's this all about? So I'm not saying we can find the answer to that immediately, but if we can, that might be an interesting thing to know.
But Greenpeace campaigner Christine Rose has dubbed the plan an absolute lemon and a ham-fisted attempt to cook the books, and says other industries will end up picking up the slack. Here's our climate correspondent, Isabel Ewing.
A new dawn for New Zealand farmers, finally on track to paying for their greenhouse gases.
It's about being part of the solution.
Well, hang on. Finally on track to paying 5% of the cost of their greenhouse emissions. Let's be accurate. They're not on track. I mean, if I was on a weight loss scheme and I was trying to lose 50 kilos and I'd lost 2.5 kilos, it would be a start. I don't know if that would mean I was on track, only having done 5% of it. Just, side note.
Today is a watershed moment for New Zealand and the New Zealand farmers.
Albeit some, like the Federated Farmers, reluctantly getting on board.
Well, we've signed up to it.
No,
The He Waka Ekinoa Task Force represents the primary sector, and its emissions pricing system is more carrot than stick.
It means that, all those positive things that we are going to do are going to be recognised, and that we have a credible system that will achieve the targets moving forward.
Landowners will need to register if they have one or more of the following: 550 animals, 50 dairy cattle, 700 pigs, 50,000 poultry, or use more than 40 tonnes of nitrogen fertiliser.
Now, I'm not sure whether those big numbers or not. Maybe if you're involved in the farming sector, I can see Raywin is commenting in our thing, who's in Selwyn. I think that from talking to the guys from the Milks documentary, I think our average flock in New Zealand, is that flock? Herd of cows. Our average herd size is about 500. So if you've got 50 cows, that would be quite a small number of cows, I would think. Probably also means if you're a, whatever the word that they use for if you've got a small allotment with a couple of animals, you're not going to be caught up in it. So it does, 50 is, you're not going to be like a husband and wife on a small allotment with your own, living in a sustainable way you're not going to have 50 cows. So people like that don't look like they're going to get caught up in it, I would think. 50,000 chickens is a bit of much. Yep.
Greenpeace reckon, they're actually quoting the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change calls for 24 to 48% reduction in methane emissions. And as the person before that they quoted said, and Greenpeace sort of say themselves that this is sort of I guess emissions trading scheme in general is sort of a cooking of the books, where that there is a sort of virtual net outcome of that 5% reduction in methane because of offsets, but the worst polluters keep going on with the same emissions of methane.
Yeah.
Like
right.
it you know what I mean? It adds like another sort of virtual layer on top.
Yeah.
Where you can sort of start cooking those underlying numbers.
I mean, is there a part of this conversation? Rose just also brought this up about what New Zealand actually contributes, 1%, 40% reduction will be 0.04% of the. I mean, I think that I'm sort of on board with the idea that we got to play our part, and we obviously can only impact what we're doing in this country, even if it is a small amount. I also think, though, Ro, that there is an element of this which, if it makes us a more attractive source of things like food and dairy, because we are, whatever the correct word would be, carbon neutral, carbon reduced, we're on board with the emissions trading scheme, then even though we are small in impact to the world, it may actually help our farming sector in the exporting way quite a lot. As we talked about at the start of this, if they're going to be a preferred supplier now because of what they now need to do under the government direction for emissions, etc.
Yeah. About 1% of global emissions is New Zealand, and I mean these industries we're talking about are half our emissions. But yeah, I mean, as you're saying, and as guests that we've had on before, like Robert Patman, often say that New Zealand needs to be this new sort of influential leader in a new global order of, blah, 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 where, we have more influence on the international stage.
Yeah,
et cetera, et cetera.
I also think that, and I don't like the term punched above our weight, but there's been lots of things that we've been quite effective in starting trends for and being leaders in, whether it's women in the vote, whether it's the nukes protest, whether it's the apartheid protest in 81. If we took the attitude that we're only little and we can't do much, then probably none of those things would have happened either. But what we're doing is doing it for this country, which then has a flow on to the rest of the world. I'm not suggesting that we're going to change the rest of the world what we're doing, but I also don't think that just being little and with little impact, localized impact, can't also create a flow on to other parts of the world as well, because we've seen it from New Zealand before. All right, let's play some more of the story.
They'll calculate their emissions, methane and long-lived gases like CO2 separately using a standardised calculator. They'll be incentivised to use tech like low methane sheep genetics to lower their levy, and that levy will be invested into research and development. The task force proposes farmers get 95% off what other polluters get charged under the emissions trading scheme. Farmers say that's necessary to stay internationally competitive.
We want our consumers to feel as if they can choose our beautiful products and know that there is a whole lot of commitment behind that.
Greenpeace.
There's a bit of a mixed message there, though, as well, because we're talking about partly doing this to make us a more premium product on the world, then we should be able to charge more. But if what the farmers are saying is we can't charge anymore, so we've got to keep the cost down. Like there's a little bit of a mixed message there. This is either going to make us a more premium product because of our our food miles, that kind of stuff. Like you're saying, George, being able to get into some places that also have legislation around climate issues, or it's not. So I guess the devil's in the detail. We'll find out how that actually works as well. Because for anyone in business, understanding that another business is getting a 95% reduction in any kind of fee, then you have to pay. Especially if they're the ones who are the worst in that area, is a bit galling. It's a bit. You think if you are like a 1/100th the emitter that the farm down the road is, and you guys end up paying the same because they're only paying 5% and you're paying full price. It's a bit. I can imagine that'll be a bit galling for some businesses who don't get a 95% reduction. All right.
He's asking why the biggest polluting industry is allowed to write its own climate policy.
This is industrial agriculture committing to do as little as possible while still making it look as if they're doing something.
The climate change minister knows there are still plenty of holes to patch up.
What are the price points that are going to make a difference? What's the level of levy that's going to be needed in order to cover the costs of the program itself and to provide those incentives to farmers?
Cut pollution, stay profitable, and keep food production sustainable for future generations. Big job.
That's pretty much it. We'll leave the wrap up from. They've got a climate reporter. How about that? So that's basically the sum total of it. It looks like it's a bit of a world first. Looks like it's moving forward in an area, but as we've just found out, George, if it's for a 4 to 5% reduction and we need 24 to 48. It's a start, but is it really going to do anything? Mm-hmm. If they're only paying 5% of what the overall costings are, is it token? So is what Greenpeace is saying is accurate and correct, or is it the beginning of where it's going to go? I remember talking to Julianne Gentle when we had a debate on housing, and the Greens have this idea of quality, affordable housing as a right. And I asked her, well, what happens if it's quality but it's not affordable, or it's affordable but it's not quality? And she was basically saying, well, these are the aspirations. These are the aspirations we try to get to in 20 years from now. Is that what this is? Is this the starting point for an aspiration which will be 24 to 48% in 3 or 4 or 5 decades from now? I don't know.
Yeah, the aspiration should be the dismantling of that whole industry, right? And its replacement with a industry that doesn't have the emissions that it has. That's what I think, but there's not the political capital for that. And the farmers are, massive sort of, special interest group, massive landholders, massive wealth holders. And, with that all comes the sort of political power positions that they have. But yeah, I would think that, getting rid of the industry would be
a good starting point.
Good. Yeah. I don't know. If we're just chucking out alternatives, I guess might as well chuck out that one.
It would also be interesting to see what would happen. Like if you're going to get charged this with over 50 head a cow, I wonder if you'll find people trying to get around it by breaking up their herds and businesses into 49 cows on, you know what I mean? Like, this is no longer one business. This is 4 businesses, and there's 49 cows in each of them. No emission charge. I don't know. Anyway. All right, it's interesting. And look, I'm as we're talking, George, I'm realizing that I think tonight's show feels very chilled and laid back and low energy. And part of that is probably because I'm under the weather, as you can hear in my voice. So I apologize about that if you're kind of coming on board and going, oh, what's going on? These guys seem quite chill tonight. It is a bit chill tonight. So bear with us. Bear with me. I don't have a backup. There's no plan B for running the show live at 10 o'clock at night. So we're here. All right, let's switch gear a little bit and talk about one of our fan favorites, which is the ACT Party and
friend
David's
of the show.
Friend of the show, and David Seymour. Stoned as fuck, says Jay. Yeah, that's the other, maybe that's the other option. Really, it's a build that wall moment. That it's the tried and true things that they come back to all the time, that he wants New Zealand to be equal when it comes to race. And they've launched a bit of initiative in the last couple of days. And he has come out saying that a referendum on the Treaty of Waitangi is a, quote, bottom line, end quote, for his party, but its potential coalition partner, National, isn't interested. Here's some comments from David Seymour.
We have today released our latest public policy document, Democracy or Co-Government. This paper answers the question of how ACT would behave in government towards the questions around the role of the treaty, our constitutional settings, and how we solve some of the long-term problems around equality of opportunity, righting the wrongs of the past, and keeping Maori language and culture alive, all of which we think are important issues. Co-government, the dividing of people into 2 different baskets of political rights, is not only wrong, but actually counterproductive to these goals. And so in this paper, we set out in 3 areas how we would deal with the increasing judicial activism around the meaning of the treaty with the Treaty Principles Act, how we would go about reversing much of the legislation that has been put in place, particularly over the last 5 years, that tends to give people different rights and duties based on their whakapapa, and how we would go about
he's not even hiding it anymore. Like, different rights and privileges based on their whakapapa. Like we've been saying for 6 months, the reason this comes off, and the reason that some people that think this comes off as, akin to white supremacy or akin to racism, is it's not that David Seymour wants equality when it comes to race. It's that David Seymour only wants equality when it comes to race. That's the only thing he's looking for equality in. Everyone knows this now, what the protected classes are. The protected classes are all those things under the Human Rights Commission, whether it's age or gender or race or sexual orientation, or actually I don't know if gender is under there, but anyway, or ethnicity. They're the protected classes. David Seymour only wants to wipe out the special privileges or the benefits given to the race category, none of the other ones. And I just don't know why the mainstream media don't pick up on this more. It's like any other area where a group of people get an advantage based on a sector of society they belong to, whether it's disability or religion or age or whatever. He doesn't want to see equality in those areas. He only wants to see it when it comes to race. That's it. I don't know how people can argue that. I don't know how people can't see that. And I don't know why that's not being yelled out from the rooftops every time that he talks about this kind of stuff. Anyway.
Orienting the public service to use data and evidence to focus on all people's equal opportunity rather than what we would regard as lazily dividing people into tangata whenua and tangata tiriti, as has become fashionable across many parts of the public service.
On Oranga Tamariki, the repealing that section removes the mention of the treaty, but the discussion paper says the treaty should be seen as taonga. Could you tell me, how does that work?
This is quite an interesting point. I'll come back to this because we're going to have a look at a story here on RNZ. ACT launches an anti-co-governance proposal. And one of the things that they claim, right, they claim that left-aligned parties have been pushing through profound constitutional change by stealth and proposes to reverse a series of laws. This is ACT proposes to reverse a series of laws brought in by Labour. They say divide New Zealanders by race, including Oranga Tamariki Act Section 7.AA. So, like, this is an important point to notice when they bounce around. So we're being told from RNZ out of their press release, which I think is here, that they want to get rid here of Oranga Tamariki Act Section 7.AA, which I have there, because it divides New Zealanders by race, right? That's why they tell us they want to get rid of it. But at the press conference, something very different is said.
So Section 7AA adds an extra layer into the bill. We already have protections within the Oranga Tamariki bill when it comes to whānau, hapu and iwi in Section 5, 4 and 13 of the Act. Section 7AA just adds another layer of bureaucracy, and it depends on how the person interprets what the principles of the treaty are.
So at the press conference, you're saying we need to get rid of that because there's another layer of bureaucracy. But later on, they're saying we need to get rid of it because it divides New Zealanders based on race. So already they're giving us mixed messages as to what their actual purpose is, and they're not speaking with one voice. So I think we know which it is, but that's not what's being said at the press conference. They're saying too much bureaucracy. Actually, no, because they're saying elsewhere it's because it divides people based on race.
And unfortunately, it's to the detriment of our most vulnerable children. Instead of looking at their best interests, they're going straight to the principles of the treaty. And a lot of children are being left in circumstances that they shouldn't be because of this.
There you go. I'll shut that down in case something else has to play away. George, got anything you want to add to this at the moment? I'm going to actually read out some of what ACT's actually saying, but these are the first couple of clips there. It's sort of a tried and true for the ACT party, David Seymour in particular, wanting to make sure. It's funny also how everyone's always like, I want to make sure you group that I'm not a part of are getting an alleged advantage. That's not fair. I don't want you to have it. Me, I get these advantages. Yeah, I will leave those alone. But you group getting advantage that I can't have. Yeah, we better stop that.
Yeah, that the political aspect as well here. I can't imagine a Luxon government agreeing to some sort of referendum on co-governance and treaty. I'm not even sure how the language around that would work. It would never get agreed on. I don't know what question you would ask of the public, and the public aren't sort of constitutional experts as well, right? We live in a sort of representative democracy where smarter people can work out the shit. I don't want to have the responsibility of deciding, what's up with the fucking treaty and all that sort of stuff. I don't think a referendum is politically viable in a Luxon government, and two, democratic in a funny way.
Well, you're right about the democracy thing. It's not democratic because the thing that people don't seem to understand. I know that everybody here is enlightened and onto this already, so I'm preaching to the choir a little bit here. But what's the thing that people don't seem to understand, that some people don't seem to understand, is that running a country by referendum is mob rule. And when you start to run a country by referendum, or even hold referendums to make decisions, then the big question you have to ask is, how do you protect the minority? I used to talk about this on ZB quite a lot because it was a redneck, right-wing, white, old people radio station, which is why I fitted in so well. And I would say to people, how do you protect the minority? And of course, because of their mindset straight away, they'd start thinking about things like ethnicity and race. And I'd go, do you own a dog? And they go, yep. I go, well, you're in a minority. So what if we start a referendum that puts clamps down on dog owners? Any group that's smaller than the majority is a minority. So when you start running things by mob rule or by referendum or by what the majority think or want, what do you do to protect the minorities? In this instance, it's an ethnic minority. It's a race minority. And the other thing that drives me wild is, and I know that if I said to Mr. Seymour, I don't suspect he'll ever come back on the show after we told him why people think he's racist, but is that if you said to any one of these politicians, do you think funding should be allocated to the people most in need? The answer by, I think, most politicians would be yes. The follow-up question is, well, what if that group of people is a race? then you fund that race differently from the rest. And if you have a look at the health outcomes in New Zealand as to what's going on, then Māori Pacific Island are suffering worse than the rest when it comes to health outcomes. So money needs to be driven into it. If it happened to be, I don't know, people living in Hawke's Bay and it was about their water getting giardia, should we drive more money into there to help those people getting giardia who happen to, their group was living in Havelock North? The answer would be yes. If their group happens to be an ethnic group and it's provable and it's statistical and you can see it, then the answer should be yes, no matter what. And what they're saying is, yes, drive money into these areas where people need help, unless it's a race, unless the group is a race. Yes, give privileges to these people who are in a protected class, unless it's a race. And that's why it comes off as so racist, because the only thing they're ever worried about in ACT is making people equal, making groups equal based on race, nothing else. Let's have a look at what actually they've said before we move on. I've got a couple other things here as well. So this is their actual heading off their website. New Zealand is being transformed into a country where your rights depend on who your ancestors were. Labour is treating people differently based on their ethnic group. The colour of your skin is now more important than the content of your character. Now, I thought this was kind of ironic because I actually thought, you know, in general, I'm going to stereotype here, but I'd say ACT voters often treat people differently based on their ethnic group, just coming from where they sit on the political spectrum. And I think that if you put other protected groups in there, they wouldn't have a problem with it. Labour, let's say government, is treating people differently based on their religious group. Most people wouldn't have a huge problem with that. Like I don't think people in ACT would have a huge problem with it. Do you think that the Catholic Church should be forced to have female priests? ACT is going to say no, but hang on, that's the government treating Catholics differently based on their religious group. And they wouldn't have a problem with that. But when it comes to race, they do. Just so you know, because I brought it up before, 7AA, which is one of their concerns, is basically how the quality assurance standards interacts with the treaty. It's basically treaty issues. It's about how it looks in and handles the treaty and how it's important within the government agency to reflect the treaty, which again seems to me to be something that it's quite an easy conversation to have with people. There's this contractual agreement that this country was based upon, and the contract needs to be upheld. That seems to be the end of that conversation for me. And much like any contract, if both parties agree to cancel the contract, sweet. You know, George, if you're my tenant and you're in a 12-month lease and you want to get out after 9 months and both parties agree, of course, that's fine. But at the moment, you haven't got both parties agreeing to cancel that contract. You've got some members of one party wanting to cancel that contract. And no matter what you do with a referendum, to cancel a contract, you either need to fulfill it or have both parties agree to cancel it. And we don't have that. So I don't know. It just seems we make such a big deal about how difficult it is to understand the stuff. There's a contract that we need to stand by because it's the founding document of this country. It seems that simple to me, George. Though, am I oversimplifying it?
Probably, but it works.
As to the actual story that we just talked about, I was going to also talk about how National responded to the ACT Party saying this was a bottom line. So the ACT Party is basically saying, if you want us to come into power with you, this needs to happen. It will never happen. So ACT will either back down or National will give them some kind of non-binding, non-referendum something.
You start with all your eggs on the table or whatever going into negotiations. I'm sort of thinking of this comment from Jay. What's the benefit? I'm not saying. I mean, it's a bunch of dog whistling. It's a bunch of red meat for their base.
Yeah, no, that's what it is.
And it's also the extreme point from which you start negotiations with a coalition partner, I guess.
So it's where the house owner wants 800,000 for their house on paper, but really they'll be happy with 750, and the house buyer we'll pay you 700 only. That's all we've got, but they'll eventually raise up to 750. So they're basically just starting high, and then they'll start to come down to a place of negotiation. Because as you can see on the screen right now, if you're watching, this is Christopher Luxon says that National did not support a referendum on the treaty. And goes on to say a few more things. We don't need to get too much into that. Luxon said the public wasn't on the same page about exactly what co-government meant, and the debate about the treaty and co-governance would become confused. Act Justice spokesperson Nicole McKee said an increased focus on Te Tiriti law was having constitutional ramifications. She proposed the principle of Te Tiriti or Waitangi be redefined. That's good. So this person wants to change the contract. So again, if you have a contract, if you're going to change it, both parties need to agree. One party doesn't go, oh, by the way, that contract we agreed to? Yeah, I'm going to change it. But anyway, she proposed the principles of Te Tiriti o Waitangi be redefined to focus on all New Zealanders. She said it should include 3 principles. The New Zealand government has the right to govern New Zealand. The New Zealand government will protect all New Zealanders' authority over the land and other property. All New Zealanders are equal under the law with the same rights and duties. It's such unintelligent legislation, because all New Zealanders are never going to be equal under the law, because some New Zealanders have different rights and privileges. It's how it works.
And also, as you've been saying, it totally disregards that the treaty was meant to be a treaty between two peoples.
Yeah.
And also, as which they're doing on purpose, they sort of just brush aside the history, right? That the white man, the colonizer, was privileged over the native peoples, etc., the institutional racism that came along with that, and the white supremacy that's solidified. That, as well as the treaty being two peoples.
Yeah.
Ideally, supposedly, I don't know.
I mean, I know I oversimplify things, George, but let's go back to the flatting analogy. If I have a contract with you and we have a contract for 12 months at the flat, and then you get 4 flatmates, I can't just walk in and say, hey, by the way, we're going to change that contract, George, and I'm going to include all your flatmates on that, and everyone has equal power in this now. It's not how it works. I've got an agreement with you. I've got a one-person agreement. The treaty is a 2-party agreement. It's the Crown and it's Māori. That's it. You don't get just to bring anybody else into the agreement now because you want to. So it's ludicrous. Yeah. I mean, for people who don't understand this, to be clear,
especially if you consider that the treaty hasn't been fulfilled, that rental agreement that I have with you hasn't been too flash.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I've been a terrible landlord, if we're honest. Anyway, let's have a look at the last story of the day. It's about the Inequality Index. It's an interesting one, actually, because it seems that TV3 is the only people to pick up on this tonight. Oxfam Aotearoa has an international inequality index, and TV3 seems to think that New Zealand's done pretty poorly in it. And on some levels, there's lots of things to improve upon. But let's just have a look at the story first.
The government needs to tax wealth and corporates more. That's the call from Oxfam Aotearoa after its International Inequality Index found New Zealand ranks 136th out of 161 countries when it comes to fair wealth distribution. It found our tax policies rank just 91st in the world, while our labour rights place us in 74th. And they have something to say about the big profits to our supermarkets too. Political reporter Imogen Wells has the exclusive details.
New Zealand supermarkets took home the big bucks while we were all locked down, with excess profits of more than $1 million a day. Oxfam Aotearoa says it's time to chomp away at those gains.
Some people are doing quite well, and a lot of people are struggling.
And here's why. NewsHub can reveal in its latest Inequality Index, New Zealand ranked 136th out of 161 countries for fair wealth distribution. Oxfam wants to see supermarkets and other top-earning corporates forced to pay up via a windfall tax, a one-off targeted tax for those benefiting from something they weren't responsible for, like a pandemic.
So tax those people and corporates who have plenty and are amassing amounts that they don't need, and use that revenue to share with people who don't have enough food to feed their family.
The index ranks governments on policies and actions that have major impacts on reducing inequality, like public service spend, taxes, and labour rights. Overall, New Zealand did rank 8th, but
no, our tax system isn't fair.
Craig Elliff was on the government's tax working group and agrees.
It's highly effective. I don't think it's fair. I think we have a situation where a lot of wealthy people do not pay very much tax.
If we're willing to call what we currently have a cost of living crisis, then we have to peel back a layer and understand that what we're actually dealing with is an inequality crisis.
Last year, the government introduced an extra tax bracket for super earners, with anything over $180,000 taxed at 39%. The Prime Minister admits the scales could be better balanced.
But I think every government would acknowledge there's ways that you can continue to ensure fairness.
The pandemic years have seen what's being called a global inequality explosion. But while the Prime Minister acknowledges the unfairness, she's already ruled out a capital gains tax and a wealth tax, which experts say are the easiest ways to level the playing field.
There you go. I think it's really interesting. I find this really interesting because if you want to have a look at it, I mean, we've done a little bit of research on it. This is the actual index here. I think one of the things that's interesting from the story, yeah, look, Simple's actually picked up on exactly one of the points I was going to make, almost as an aside. So this is the list of countries, and the overall index puts us at 8th. Norway, Germany, Australia, Belgium, Canada, Japan, Denmark, New Zealand. So as a country overall, we're doing really quite well, but that means there are some areas to work on and improve on. It was particularly interesting that the news media who reported on it tonight picked up on like where we're doing badly, and as Sai says there, kind of as a throwaway comment, it's like, oh yeah, we're doing 8th overall, but it's terrible in this region, and it's terrible in this region, and it's terrible in this area. And yeah. I'm not torn on it because I run a business and I want to make profits. And I guess this question in my head, and I'm happy to sit back and be educated, but my question in my head is, what is excessive? What is ethical? What is okay? Like they talk about a windfall tax, like because of the pandemic. I've worked with businesses, and I worked with businesses during the first lockdown that actually got back on their feet because they did quite well during that pandemic. But for the 2 years previously to that, they were going backwards. So I would look at them and go, if you then put a windfall tax on those businesses, then they wouldn't have got back on their feet, which they managed to during the pandemic, providing a service to their community. So I look at it and I kind of think it's not quite as black and white as, well, it never is it? Devil's always in the detail. Sorry, George, you're going to say something there, mate.
Yeah, I mean, I liked the news story. I think you could have easily done the 8th thing and done a fluffy piece about how, oh yeah, blah, blah, blah. But they've actually looked at the data and realized, well, hang on. Basically, the index is saying we're really efficient at taxing the tax base, but in terms of wealth distribution, we're really, really bad. So that the index takes things like, it uses indicators like labor rights, women's rights, minimum wage, where we're sort of up towards the top, but then when it comes to wealth distribution, inequality, we're really, really bad. Right. In fact, the one of the most interesting sort of indicators that they use is the one that's quoted, we're 136 in terms of the outcome of our tax policy. The efficiency and the tax productivity, we're 3rd, which is going to help that overall thing. But in terms of the outcomes of these tax policies, Oxfam at least doesn't think we're doing a good job. It's always good to look at these indexes because indexes, I mean, people love this sort of stuff, journalists especially, when they need to write a story. But it's always fun to sort of look at what's going on behind the scenes.
And as you can see, there is a lot of data there. I mean, we haven't had time to go through all of this yet, but that's why we go to a news story to give us the headlines and then try and delve into it. It is an in-depth amount of research.
Both qualitative and quantitative research. So, I mean, a lot goes into it. The other thing, it's was gonna say, I guess would be, yeah. I mean, supermarkets and that sort of thing. Yeah, obviously something. I mean, as we've looked at, $1 million a day in profits just doesn't seem right.
Well, no. For accuracy, $1 million a day in excess profits. That was their profits above their profits. That was their excess profits.
Right. That's right.
Yeah. So look, from owning a business and running a business, yeah, I want to make profit, but where is that line? I don't know. I'm also interested in the ideological conversation around, I guess, talking to people who are ideologues versus people who aren't. I had a conversation in the weekend with someone about renting a house out who said that they thought it was unethical to rent a house out because then you're getting someone else to pay off your mortgage. To which I thought, but hang on, the alternative to that is people without homes, because some people need and want to rent. So if you don't have,
well, I don't know. Think outside the box. There's lots of other alternatives.
But if you don't have rentals, like think about Dunedin, for example. Lots of students. Every student needs to own a house. How does it work?
Open your mind.
My mind's open. Tell me then. Tell me.
I mean, if we're talking about the ethics of it, I'd disagree with the person and say that the person with the mortgage is also alienated from that. They don't own the property; the bank owns the property, right? So it's like the alienation at the core of it. Marx would put it that we're alienated from the fruits of our labor. That we're altogether alienated from the fruits of our labor, except for the top dogs at the supermarkets or whatever.
I mean, I think the supermarkets are also outliers, aren't they? Like, I mean, when they were talking about the windfall tax there, like, I kind of go, I guess I want it to be fair, right? And that's, I guess, what I'm thinking out loud. And maybe I don't have an answer here, but I'm like, so if we're going to apply a windfall tax to these companies that do well for a reason at a period of time, I mean, where does that stop? So hotels get a windfall tax when there's an All Blacks test match on in their town because there's a windfall because of an All Blacks test match. And what about the flip side to it? What happens if businesses, whatever the opposite of a windfall is? What's the opposite of windfall? A rain slide? I don't know.
Well, that's where we bail them out.
Yeah. So I mean, if it's fair and it's fair, then so be it. But
yeah, but by the time you've got to a windfall tax, your tax system's already a bit broken, right? That you shouldn't need those. Yeah, I agree. You shouldn't need those instruments if you've got a good tax system already.
Yeah, well, I guess as you say, the good thing that's been pointed out from that thing is work to be done on the tax system, work to be done on wealth inequality. Other areas in New Zealand seem to be doing quite well, and perhaps the way you make a stronger chain is to fix the weakest link, and maybe that's what they're saying. Pardon me. All right. Is there any chats in there that we need to fire up, or you want to fire up before we get on with this? Someone talking about Jay talking about. Oh, you did that one, didn't you? We've already done that one. Simon talking about referendums. Look how long the Brexit referendum has been going on. Still haven't solved that yet. So I don't know that. Yeah. There we go. Good to know. All right. Well. Again, apologies for the voice tonight. I am, as I think Rob said, Smooth Jazz FM with Pat and George tonight. 93.4 Smooth Jazz FM. But that's us. Anything else you want to throw out there for tonight, George? Any more pictures of family members from the 1930s?
I did. No, I did have more up my sleeve, but they're not on my computer.
Same.
Now, that wasn't the 1930s. That one was like, I don't know, fucking 1800s, 1890s. So yeah, that was the first photograph ever taken in Ireland.
Ireland. All right. Hey, thanks for joining us again tonight, guys. We appreciate your time. Appreciate being with us for another episode of Big Hairy News. And we'll be back again tomorrow night from 10 p.m. I'm assuming Chewy's probably going to be with us tomorrow night, but we'll see how that all pans out. Be safe. Have a good night. Thank you for being with us. And I'm going to bed. Hooroo.